First of all, Harvey, I'd like to thank you for being here this afternoon to talk with us about your experience of being a volunteer for Project 5. And I think it would be important for our volunteers to know that you're an expert in the field of solution-focused work. You've been working with this model and approach for many years, and so it's a real honour, actually, to have you as a volunteer for us. I suppose I should say that Project 5, we thought very carefully about the sort of approach that we thought our volunteers would be able to connect with and have the potential of developing a sense of confidence around. And we were struck by the solution-focused approach because of its emphasis on working with staff members' strengths and their capacities and their future ambitions and hopes in a positive way. And we thought that would be very important for people wanting the support and involvement of Project 5 when they were being challenged in their working context. And that's going to be both in the NHS and also in social care settings. But I suppose I'd like to hear from you how you got involved in solution-focused approach and how you've been finding using it in Project 5.
Okay, well, as you say, I have been doing it for a long time. It goes way back 35 years, I should think, nearly, with colleagues, Evan George, Chris Iveson, and we were a team of social workers in the NHS at the time. And we got very interested in brief methods of working, and solution-focused brief therapy was really just starting to get publicised in 1986. So it was very, very new, coming across from America where it was developed. So we developed it together as a project. I think we were the first in the UK to be doing it. And were able to follow up on our own cases, and there were a whole range of cases across the mental health spectrum of young people up to older age. And really just found that it said what it was on the tin. It was solution focused, it was brief, and we started to conduct some evaluation studies. So we then realized we could start offering this training and module for people, and we set ourselves up as an organization called Brief, and based in London, and really have continued ever since then, running around offering training courses to people in the frontline staff, mainly all in the public sector virtually, NHS, education, probation, social care, whatever, to use the solution-focused approach, as we started to call it, because we realized that so many people coming to our courses, nurses, doctors, social workers and the rest, would say, well, we're not therapists, so don't teach us a therapy. So whether it was they wanted to think of it as coaching or just simply a practice, we felt the approach lent itself very well to brief areas of work. The thing about solution focus is that it's not that it's a shortened version of something else. It is a model in its own right that happens to end up being brief. The follow-up studies show that it tends to be in the region of 3 to 4 sessions that people need. And I was going over the cases I've been seeing for Project 5, and I, in the 2 months that I've been taking referrals, and I've had a total of 18 referrals, I've completed 9 of them so far. And I was just noting that and this is on the sort of well-being counselling track, all these particular cases. So they've all been offered 3 sessions, and they, of the 9 completed cases, only 2 of them actually have used their allowance of 3 sessions. So when I averaged it out, those 9 cases, hardly a big research sample, but they've all needed an average of 2 sessions each, which suggests to me Project 5 has certainly got it right in terms of thinking of 2 sessions for coaching or 3 for what you might call it well-being support. And some of those who needed only 2 sessions, for example, would come to the second session saying, well, actually, I've made huge strides, lots of progress since the first session. And I barely needed the second session. So I think research studies across the board in therapy and coaching and other things have shown that the modal number is often one, the number of sessions that clients come for. And they're often seen as, well, they only came once, it must be a failure. But actually, in many cases, I can't give exact figures on this, they have been quite successful. And there is a whole single session therapy movement afoot as we speak, led by people like Michael Hoyt in the States. So I think the good news is that this approach, which I think fits Project 5 so well, it works. It's not just that it's brief, but I think all those service users who have come that I've worked with, the 9, have all said it's been very useful to them, and they've all, and most of them, I won't say every single one of them, have actually said everything they wanted from it has been sufficient. I remember one person in our first meeting, she told me she'd also signed up somewhere else, she was on a waiting list for CBT for something, and she said last session had been very useful, but then the CBT came through, so she didn't continue with me. So, so I think, and our own brief zone research has shown that generally speaking, people need 2 to 3 sessions, and there can be a 2/3 to 80% success rate. So it really has seemed to work very well. And I think, looking at the people I've worked with in this 2 months, they've come from the widest range of professions, as one might expect in the NHS, from doctors of all different types, psychologists, speech and language therapists, a whole range of nurses, an NHS manager, I mean, a whole range of people. And by and large, coming as one might have expected with issues around stress, trauma, not sleeping well, depression, all these sorts of things, many of whom, it has to be said, are saying that actually the problems they've had with stress predate COVID, so the COVID has just intensified issues that they might have been working on. And I think that, yeah, so it's as one might have predicted of service users coming at this time to a service like this, the kind of issues they're dealing with. And yeah, please.
Yeah, I suppose one of the thoughts I had, though, Harvey, was what you saw as the limitations of the solution-focused approach.
Well, I mean, again, I'll just very quickly say that the research, as I know it, hasn't identified particular problems that Solution Focus doesn't touch, as it were. It seems to work across the board of presenting problems, but it also fails across the board. It doesn't work, nothing works 100% with people. So I think that it's certainly true that the, yeah, as I say, it works across the board, but I'm wondering, every person I work with, I think, well, I wonder if it's going to work with them, especially those talking about trauma and things like that. I'm still wondering, and I know it's not going to work with absolutely everybody, but I think a key thing for me is a technique that our group, Brief, developed 20 plus years ago, which was to start the first meeting, and which we know very often is the only meeting, as it turns out, but you can't know that in advance, by not inviting people to talk about the problems and why they're there, but to start by talking, and you mentioned hopes earlier, to start with people's hopes from the work. Not just their hopes in life, but starting very specifically, what are your best hopes from our work together, from our talking together? Once you start there, it becomes, in a sense, less about the problem that's brought them there, more about where they want to get to and the direction. And getting that sense of direction means that people can see ways they can move forward, regardless of what's been, in a sense, holding them back. In my experience, virtually everybody's, when you say, what are your best hopes from this talking, and they launch into what's brought them there. They hear it almost as if, why are you here? What's going on? So you hear about problems, and solution-focused work, we're not stopping people talking about their problems. One of the founders of the approach, Steve DeShazer, memorably said, we may be solution focused, but we're not problem phobic. So we can hear and acknowledge what people are going through. But once we start saying, so you're having a really tough time, what are your best hopes? And you might have to go back to the question. What are your best hopes from this? And they might say, well, not to feel so stressed or not to feel so anxious, which immediately triggers the lovely solution-focused questions of what do you want instead? Or what will you be or be doing instead of stress, anxiety, worry, and so on? And people are gradually being guided into what we now call the preferred future that they want. They know what they don't want. What do they want? And once they start to talk about feeling happier, for example, then we can say, move into, and many people will know that Stephen Shazer and his colleagues in Milwaukee developed something called the miracle question. You know, things changed overnight. So I might move into saying, so what would your life be like tomorrow if you had achieved your best hopes? If you woke up tomorrow and you were happy and calm and at peace with yourself and so on. And then very importantly, bringing in questions of who would notice. Who would be the first person to notice you're like this? How would people at work know you're calm or whatever? And you develop this vision of how people want to be. So it starts off very heavily future focused, if I can put it that way. Do you want me to carry on just saying a little bit more of the process then? Just to
I think what you've said, Harvey, will be really helpful for volunteers to hear, to be honest, to actually say how some of the ideas, how the approaches are used from a practitioner rather than like being given guidelines or being taught is so important.
Yeah.
To hear it from someone who uses it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you could go on, that would be wonderful.
Okay, well, I mean, I think this, once we've got a sense of where people want to get to, then the technique I most eager to get to then is to ask people on a 0 to 10 scale where they think they're at. So if 10 we can take to represent where they want to get to, their description of tomorrow, their preferred future, not the things they don't want, not the problems gone, but how the life they want to lead, the relationships they want to be having. That will be a 10 out of 10, 0 being the furthest they've been from it. I adapt that sometimes. I might say 0 being the point you're at when you arranged this appointment, and so on. But 0's down the end and 10 where you want to get to. Where are you now? And if someone says you get anything, I've had anything between 1 and 6 in a first meeting. And but it doesn't matter what the number is in one sense, because it's not about, oh, how come you're as low as that? It's about how come you're as much as that. Even the person says they're at 1. Well, how come you're 1 and not 0? What are you doing to be at 1? And lots of questions. We use a lot of what else questions that tell you you're at 1 before asking, and how will you know you've reached 2? So going back to your question about possible limitations, is the feeling people might have that, well, people have been through really rotten times and trauma and one thing and another. How does this deal with the sort of real struggle and pain and suffering that people have been through? But it's not ignoring that pain and suffering. It's kind of saying, well, there you are at this number on this scale. We know where you want to get to, which is a 10 out of 10. So let's look at how you're keeping the show on the road. How are you at that number? How is it? How will you know you've moved up? And I think people do feel very heard, and they are being helped into that place of, I want things to go better. I do want to continue doing this work. I do want to continue giving of myself to my job and to my friends and my relatives. Of course, there's the odd person who's actually starting to think, well, actually, maybe I can't take this and I need to rethink the direction of my work. I've had 1 or 2 edging up towards a quite significant decision like that. But again, if somebody says, you say to somebody, what are your best hopes from this? And they say, I need to make a decision. If you could easily get caught up in what does the decision need to make? What are the pros and cons of each side? The sort of thing they've been torturing themselves with anyway. And I'll just go with, well, let's say you've made a good decision. How will you know? Not what decision, but what difference it will make to you to have made a decision. And they'll talk about being calm and a place of maybe peace and relaxation, having made a decision, whichever, they're still going to have to make a decision. But what would be different at the point they've made it or can make it? We can play around with these perspectives. So I think that getting a sense of what they really want and where they are achieving it is helping people to, it's not ignoring their problems, but getting a completely different perspective on things and building up hope.
Thanks for that. I suppose it's, I'm going to ask a slightly different question, which is that at Project 5 were thinking that people may come back at a later point, so that they will come for an initial series of sessions on solution-focused work, and then they will have a break, and then they will potentially come back again. And I'm wondering about your thoughts of that. A is coming back again, and the other is, how long is a break? How long does it take for them to, in a sense, process and use the original sessions?
Yeah. I don't know about research in this field that shows what number of people come back and so on. Personally, I never see that as a failure. I think if somebody found something useful and want more of it, at the end of the day, it's not about how many sessions and am I doing it in 2 or 3 sessions. It's not about the number of sessions. It's about what's most useful to that particular person. But if I go back to the number of people I've completed work with in these couple of months, several of the people who've only done, say, 2 sessions and were thinking they didn't really need a 3rd session, and I've said to them, well, put it in the bank, draw on it later if you need to. Now it's too soon. Nobody's actually in this 2 months too soon for anybody to have needed to come back to me, I guess. So I need to watch that space to see what happens. There certainly is, in my experience over the years, a trickle of service users who will come back at a later stage, and sometimes might come back for the odd session over years sometimes. Because again, it's not being brief as it's a fixed number of sessions. It's as, what was it the Chaser said, as short as it can be and not 1 session longer. So if it's going to be 20 sessions for the person, that's as short as it can be for them, fine. But I think coming back, how much time do people need to process it? That's an interesting question. But usually there's a gap of months, so I'll wait and see what happens. I would just say, in terms of, one thing just occurs to me is that regarding the coaching thing, and I think some of what I've said about solution-focused work will be recognizable to a lot of coaches, but what they might expect is there's going to be more kind of giving people maybe homework at the end, finishing a session with an action plan, that kind of thing, that people are going away to continue work on. And some of the staff I've worked with have wanted to have some idea of things that they might be noticing and working on. I tend to just suggest they look out for things working or moving up their scale and let me know next time, rather than actually guiding them to any particular action as such. So we tend, or at least in our model at Brief, we tend to not give any kind of task or homework or whatever. We're really just saying, you're working out how come you're at that number on this scale. You're working out how you will know you've moved up. It's in your hands now.
Okay, Harvey, we've actually come to the end of our conversation this afternoon, but I would like to thank you. I think you're inspirational, and your enthusiasm in your very mild-mannered way comes across very, very strongly. So thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.